All right, next category, can CSI type programs, pardon me, make criminals smarter? I hear definitely. I hear a lot of, agreeing. Okay. Uh, Once again, speculate with me. Let's do name that crime. And several people so far on this trip, when they found out that I was a judge, I'm going to talk about these things, said, you know, how do you get away with this stuff? And I think that for the most part, it was just curiosity. I'm hoping that it's nothing more serious than that. And I'm not in the business of telling people how to commit crimes and get away with it. However, for the purpose of today's exercise, name that crime and tell me, and let's keep it to the non-brutal, nasty stuff that doesn't really make people's skin crawl. But tell me, if you're going to commit a crime, what the crime would be, and what steps you might take based upon watching these CSI type programs to get away with it. Any ideas? If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. Another case we're going to do in the third lecture, when I profile the trials of the famous and notorious, including and spotlighting O.J. Simpson, and then talking about Robert Blake and how maybe he got away with it because he was found not guilty. Sam Shepard from Ohio, many of you don't recognize that name, but if you remember the movie The Fugitive or the TV series, that's what it was loosely based upon, although in the case of Richard Kimball, he turned out to be not guilty. In the case of Sam Shepard, probably not the same result. And then we're going to talk about Lizzie Borden. So we're going to talk about trials of the century, 19th, 20th, and 21st in that particular segment. I think that's Sunday morning when we do that one, so be sure to come in for that. So yeah, O.J. Simpson kind of comes to mind with that. That was a pretty brutal murder. Name another crime and how we can maybe get away with it in terms of beating the forensics. Any ideas? Dispose of the body, okay? There was a guy named Scott Peterson, who, if you've been watching the news, is currently, he killed his wife Lacey and their unborn child Connor and disposed of the body. Not real well. He rode out some distance in San Francisco Bay on Christmas Eve after he killed her and weighted her down and dumped the body overboard. Now, he claimed to everybody else, I was just taking a little fishing trip on Christmas Eve. It sounded pretty good to some people, but not to the jury anyway. Jury finds him obviously guilty of that case. He's sitting on death row. After 8 years, there's finally an appeal. I'm not quite sure how that works, because in Ohio you've got a very limited window of opportunity for appealing your case. But anyway, Scott Peterson weighted down his wife, threw her into the bay, and thought that would be the end of it. Unfortunately, he didn't think far enough ahead, because, and this is the gruesome part, and I won't dwell on it, but when a body is weighted down and sent to the bottom of the bay, the ocean, whatever it might be, bloating occurs, air bubbles form, and even if you've done your best to wrap it in chains and that sort of thing, the decomposing body will finally break through those and break to the surface and then wash ashore, which is exactly what happened in Scott Peterson's case. So getting rid of the body didn't necessarily help him in that case. In some cases, it may, it could. Name another crime and tell me how you try to get away with it. Kaylee Anthony, okay? And there was some pretty strong forensics in that case. What happened as far as the verdict was concerned? Not guilty, okay? The jury has spoken. I'm not going to say anything that would cause me to lose my law license by criticizing a jury. Some states you can get away with it, other states you can't. We're on the open ocean, maybe I could. But in any case, she was found not guilty. But again, she may have covered her tracks pretty well. Because I think the body of her daughter, Casey Anthony, do I have the names reversed? Okay, Kaylee was the child, Casey was the mother. Okay, thank you. And throughout today and any other time that you see me, don't hesitate to correct me, please, because I want to make sure I'm accurate here. The forensics apparently weren't strong enough, or she was able to get around them enough that she was able to beat that crime. She's not being sued by anybody for wrongful death right now because she is, in fact, one of the few people who has the standing to do that. Name another crime and how you'd get away. Jimmy Hoffa, which means if you killed Jimmy Hoffa in 1974 or 75, whenever that occurred, what do you do with the body? You bury it in the... Well, no, not Twin Towers, although there were, what, 3,000 people? This is a terrible thing. 3,000 people, they found bits and pieces, and that was about it. But in Hoffa's case, bodies never been found. Killers have never been traced, although there's a pretty good idea of who it is. Nobody's ever been brought to trial and convicted. Someday when they tear down the Meadowlands, they may find a skeletalized remains of Jimmy Hoffa and find out where he is. I'm still expecting someday he's going to pop up and say, surprise, I'm here. But I don't think so, not after this length of time. Name another crime and how you'd get away with it. Okay, and that's a very popular way to try it. Make it look like a suicide is the case. Usually you have to think about this ahead of time because you shouldn't fire multiple shots if you want it to make it look like a suicide, because most people who do that usually try to dispatch themselves with one shot in a well-placed location, thinking of course of Adolf Hitler who put the gun in his mouth, fired it, and that was it, and I don't think there was any indication that anybody else did it to him. Although, you know, if you want to make it look like a suicide, you got to be really careful. Let's assume that you're doing that in this case. How would you take steps to make it look like a suicide? Judge Rick is telling people how to get away from murder. Try it. You could do that. And make sure that the angle of the bullet is what? And doesn't look like it is fired from a distance. You got to have powder burns on the body. You've got to have it in an angle that would indicate the person would have fired the weapon, whether that person was right-handed or left-handed. So those things have to be there as well. Let's look at something else here. That's a gun. No kidding. And it is a gun being held by a bare hand. What steps might you take to avoid detection if you're planning on, let's say, robbing the local 7-Eleven, which in America is one of our convenience store chains? Okay. All right. Wear gloves. That's good. Can you still get DNA off of a glove? Probably on the inside. So how do you cure that? Keep the glove or wear maybe what? That's it. Okay. The answer was wear surgical gloves. Wear rubber gloves on the inside, the regular glove on the outside. And the regular glove is going to have the powder burns and all those things, but it's not going to have DNA on the inside of the glove. Now, you got to be very careful when you do this, and you might want to take a few notes. When you do it, make sure that you have gloves on when you put the bullets in the gun, because the bullets can be recovered. Obviously, that is, as between pistols, what kind of pistol is that, by the way? Not that it's a Glock, but you know, what's the derivative? What's the general overall characteristic of this gun? Semi-automatic. What does it do when it fires a shot? The shell ejects. So you got to make sure that when you put those shells in, knowing that when you commit the robbery, if you fire the gun, you have to basically make sure you haven't touched with your hand the bullets that you're putting into the magazine before you put it in the gun. How else can you cure that, by the way? Besides rubber gloves and those things, how else can you cure the part? I love that. That's great. You heard it. You know, have your husband load the gun. Dear, why am I doing this? I'm going out target shooting. Like that? Okay. A revolver would be the preferred weapon if you're going to commit a crime that's going to involve the firing of the weapon, because it stays in the gun. Most revolvers these days, you all heard of the 6-shooter from the Old West. It's no longer the 6-shooter, it's the old 5-shooter. But in most cases, that's probably enough bullets to get whatever job you're going into completed. But that's the key thing. You know, don't eject the shells after you've fired all 5 bullets, because typically the bullets will stay, or the shells, that is, after you've fired the bullet, will stay in the gun. Oh, you guys are doing great on this. I don't need to give you hints. You're already pretty much up on these things anyway. Okay. Other types of crimes that you could commit, whereupon you may want to take certain precautions based on what you've watched on television. Any ideas? Okay. Okay, you heard that. Self-defense, make my day law. You're thinking in particular of what state? Florida, which is called, now what's that concept they have there? It's called stand your ground. In other words, in Ohio, we have kind of a derivation of that a couple steps back, and it's called the castle doctrine. The castle doctrine says basically, if somebody has broken into your house and you have a weapon, there's a presumption that you're acting lawfully if you shoot them. if they're in your house. Now, that doesn't mean you've invited your brother-in-law over and said, hey, come on over, and oh my gosh, I don't know who it is, there's an intruder in the house, and you shoot him. And I would never mention that for my brother-in-law, because my brother-in-law, as my wife is sitting back here, is one of the greatest guys in the world. I'm not being facetious about that, but any generic brother-in-law would do in those cases. But yeah, the stand your ground law, which you said, and then the castle doctrine, which assumes that you have the right to be able to defend your home with a weapon if you choose to do that, based upon the presumption that the person is in your house illegally. Now, stand your ground goes a little further than that. Stand your ground means if you feel threatened and you are armed, you have a right to defend yourself, even using deadly force. What case are we thinking of here? This is going to come up throughout the rest of the lecture, so I might as well talk about it now. Yeah, and George was in the news, if you read that little newsletter thing that we got this morning, that there's some accusation of improper conduct with a sibling or a cousin or something. He was 8, she was 6, and it continued until she was 16. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. Never any charges filed. I'm not going to speculate on that one. But in the George Zimmerman case, Mr. Zimmerman was on the neighborhood watch patrol. You all know the story. It's fresh in our minds. He claims that he was attacked by this young man, Trayvon Martin, that this young man attacked him, threw him to the ground, and was going for his gun, that is, Mr. Zimmerman's gun. Mr. Zimmerman got his gun first, fired one shot, and killed the young man, and now he's going to stand trial for murder in that case. And I think second degree, which is non-felony murder, which doesn't trigger the death penalty, but at least it is a substantial amount of prison time, basically for the rest of your life.